The room went silent as I told my son and his wife they'd never see a single cent of the fortune I had built. Emily's smile shattered, Daniel's face drained of color, and every guest stared in disbelief. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. My name is Theresa. I am 67, and I grew old on the job of being Daniel's mother. I wore out my knees kneeling to tie his laces, and wore out my back working double shifts to keep his sneakers new. When my husband, Frank, died in a pale hospital room that smelled like bleach in winter, Daniel was 11 and learning long division. I learned something else, that grief doesn't stop bills from arriving. So I taught myself to be two people, mother and father, and I taught Daniel to believe the world would open if he worked hard and called home on Sundays. He did the first part. The second came and went like weather. I don't say that with bitterness. Not yet. I say it as a fact, the way you say the hydrangeas bloom late or the coffee maker hums before dawn. I got used to the hum. I got used to the quiet after. When Daniel married Emily, I told myself I was gaining a daughter. Emily shook my hand the way people do when they've never worked a cash register, soft, light, a hint of apology. She was lovely in the photographs. A cool pearl of a smile, tidy hair the color of wheat, not a strand out of place. She managed social media for a boutique furniture brand, which, from what I gathered, meant she arranged sunlight and candlesticks in other people's rooms and then told strangers about it. She liked thin gold bracelets and saying the word boundaries with a lilt as if it were a compliment. I made room for her boundaries the way I made room for everything Daniel needed. At their small wedding, I stood at the end of the family photo line when the photographer asked for immediate relatives, and when he said, "Just the parents now," Emily's mother took my elbow and rotated me a careful half-step to the side. Her perfume was expensive and citrusy. It stung my eyes. I told myself it was the wind. Years pass fast when you keep your head down. I tended to the little house Frank and I bought when we were young and afraid of interest rates. I kept his tools oiled and his baseball cap on the garage hook, not out of superstition, just because it looked right there. I learned to roast a chicken the way you two chefs do, trussing with twine, and I brought one over the first time Daniel and Emily hosted us. Emily took the platter with 2 fingers and said, "Oh, we're plant-forward now," as if meat were a rude guest who'd arrived unannounced. I laughed to make it easier for her. Later, I slid the leftovers into my own fridge and ate them standing up with a fork. So when their 5th anniversary approached, I circled the Saturday on my paper calendar in neat blue pen and wrote card in the margin. I picked up a champagne-colored blouse at JCPenney. Nothing too shiny, just something that said I tried. I checked my phone each morning as the kettle breathed itself awake. The notification sound turned loud enough to startle the cat. A ping would make me walk to the window without reason, as if the message had a shape I could see coming up the street. Nothing came. I am not proud of the things I did to coax meaning out of silence. I reopened my email app the way some people open their fridge in the middle of the night. I searched my spam folder so thoroughly the edges of my doubt frayed. I tapped the trash icon by accident once and panicked, as if I'd thrown out a birthday cake. The mailman on our block is named Walt, a sunburned man with a kind way of wearing a hat. Twice that week, when I heard his step on my porch, I met him at the door with a smile that felt too wide on my face. "Anything in there for a Theresa Whittaker?" I asked, as if there might be 2 of us. Walt lifted the stack and thumbed through envelopes. "Water bill, catalog, coupon for tires," he said. "You expecting something special?" "Just a card." I lied. "Just a little card." He tipped his hat and moved on. I watched him walk to Mrs. Haverty's house next door. Her name is Doris, but no one calls her that. and place a thick, cream envelope into her mailbox. Later, over the low fence, she gossiped with the pleasure of a person who has always been included. "Emily's taste is divine," she said, and she made divine 3 syllables. Gold foil on the invitation. Can you imagine? They're doing a vineyard theme, strings of lights, one of those photo booths. I've got to find a shawl. Their anniversary? I asked. Careful, casual, a woman asking about the weather. She nodded brightly. Of course you're going. Family first. I folded the corner of the gardening magazine I was pretending to read and said nothing until she remembered something about her hydrangeas and tottered back inside. Then I sat very still on the patio chair while a breeze moved the wind chime. Frank hated that thing, said it sounded like cutlery clinking in the sink, and I listened to it until I realized I was shaking. Perhaps Emily changed her email list. Perhaps Daniel mistyped mine. Perhaps there was a technical glitch, a digital door that didn't recognize my knock. It is amazing, the scaffolding of excuses a mother can build in a single afternoon. After dinner, I called my cousin Linda, who never learned how to be delicate. "You didn't get yours," she said, and her voice sharpened, not with malice but with the clean edge of truth. It was one of those fancy online invites. Everyone's on a thread about what to wear. "You're not in there." She paused, the way people do when they're turning their phone to squint at a screen. They put Aunt Carol, Uncle Ray, even the Havertys. Adults only, chick cocktail. But not you. Maybe they're doing it in waves, I heard myself say, as if an invitation were a flu. It's this Saturday, Therese. Linda only shortens my name when she wants me to brace. There aren't waves left. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table where Daniel did science projects about magnets and planets, where we once taped a paper solar system to a string of dental floss and called it a model. The table's surface is nicked near the edge from when he tried to open a jar with a butter knife, and I said, "Use your sleeve, not the blade. You'll hurt yourself." And he grinned and said, "Relax, Mom," and the jar spewed pickles across the tile like green shooting stars. I can show you the stain if I move the salt shaker. I stared at the nick until it doubled. The kettle shrieked to say the water was ready. I took it off the heat and forgot to pour. Somewhere outside, a teenager laughed the way teenagers do, reckless, certain, and a car door thudded, and then a second one thudded softer, like a coda. I thought of Daniel's shoulders when he was small, just 2 worn rises under a towel at the beach. I thought of him at 16, announcing he'd gotten the lead in the school play and asking for gas money in the same breath. I thought of him the morning of his wedding, the way his hands trembled while he fastened his cufflinks, and how I buttoned the tiny silver circles for him, because old habits don't know when they're no longer needed. Emily has reasons. I am not blind to them. She likes events to match the photographs in her head. She avoids variables, weather, toddlers, mothers with stories that stretch longer than captions. She once asked me, very kindly, not to bring my potato salad to a barbecue because it doesn't align with the menu, and I decided then that kindness can be a fitted dress. Elegant, restrictive, hard to breathe in after dessert. Maybe she thinks I talk too much about Frank. Maybe she worries I don't know how to leave a party on time. Maybe she is afraid of sentiment, the way some people are afraid of thunder. But reasons are not invitations. Reasons are bridges no one lowers. By the time night pooled in the corners of the house, the truth had assembled itself without my help. It did not arrive with a bang. It settled, stubbornly ordinary, in the seat across from me and refused to leave. I was not on the list. The list included neighbors and cousins, and the woman from 2 blocks over who sells wreaths in December. It included people who had known my son for 5 years, 3 years, 6 months. It did not include the person who held his fevers and his secrets and his permission slips. It did not include me. I erased card from the margin of Saturday and left the square blank. The box looked bigger that way, the way absence always does once you outline it. The kettle cooled. The wind chime clinked. And in the quiet that followed, I felt something inside me tilt, very slightly at first, then enough that the room, the table, the nick in the wood, all slid a fraction to the left, as if the house were making room for a thought I had spent years refusing to think. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. At first I built a small church out of excuses and prayed inside it. Surely there had been a glitch, a typo, a draft invite that never sent. I polished each possibility like a stone, held it up to the light, tried to find a way it could refract into mercy. Then I dialed, and the bell tower fell. "Hey, Mom," Daniel said, the words soft, careful, the way you hold a glass that's already cracked. In the background I heard the sound of ice settling in a tumbler and a television murmuring the end of a game. I pictured him on the edge of his sectional, chewing his lip, an old habit, while Emily shaped the air with her hands, rehearsing him like she would a caption. So, about Saturday. About the invitation, I said. I think there was a mistake. There was a long seam of silence, and then he split it. Mom, Emily just thought it would be easier if you sat this one out. Easier. A sponge of a word, soft, absorbent, made to soak up mess. It landed on the table in front of me and swelled until it crowded out everything else. Easier for who? I asked. I kept my voice level because dignity isn't a coat you put on. It's the skin you grow to survive winter. For you? For Emily? For the photos? That's not fair, he said too quickly, which told me it was close to fair. It's adults only and small, and Emily's parents are hosting. And there were decisions, and we tried to keep things, like, consistent, curated, on brand. I recognized the family of words. I had heard their cousins at barbecues and bridal showers, always smiling, always moving you a half step to the side. I'm an adult, I said, and I am small when I need to be. He laughed, awkward, a boy caught with a hand in the jar. You know what I mean. What I knew was the shape of him on the other end of a hard conversation. The averted gaze, the apology that came pre-packaged with instructions. Don't make me choose. He had been practicing choices since he could walk, choosing which parent to run to with what news, which teacher to charm, which friend to please. He had learned, somewhere along the long hallway to manhood, that peace in a room could be purchased if you charged it to someone who loved you. I could have said I worked dinner shifts at Monroe's Diner, then changed shoes in the bathroom and cleaned offices until the fluorescent lights made a ringing in my ears. I could have said I learned which brand of diapers didn't leak and which landlord would wait 3 days for a check. I could have said when you were 15 and broke your arm, I slept in a chair next to your hospital bed and pretended the ache in my spine was a pillow. I could have said all of that and more, an inventory miles long, and none of it would have fit in the space afforded by easier. So I said, I hear you. Thanks, Mom, he breathed, as if I had lifted a weight off his chest that he had set there himself. We'll do something soon, just us. We'll take you out. It's just, this one is. He trailed off, a sentence dissolving because it was afraid to be seen. You have a good night, Daniel. You too. Love you. I love you, I said. I meant it like a benediction and an indictment both. When the call ended, the house resumed its old conversation. The refrigerator sighed, the clock laid down its patient dashes, the neighbor's porch light clicked on, a ritual I could time my heart to. I sat in the living room where every surface carried proof that I had existed in Daniel's life. Frames crowded the mantel. Birthdays with teeth missing, a prom photo where his tie was crooked and joy was not, a graduation picture with a mortarboard at an angle, a snapshot of us on the porch the week he moved out, my arm hooked through his like we were boarding a ship. In the glass of those frames I saw my own face twice. Once in the photo, younger and tired, but lit from within by purpose. Once in the reflection, lined differently, the light gone sideways. I felt the sob come before it arrived, like thunder you sense in your bones. I didn't fight it. I let it move through me in careful sections, the way you fold a flag. It wasn't for a party. Parties are noise and rental glassware. It was for the moment a mother realizes love is no longer the easiest thing in the room. The word began to work on me. Easier. Easier than what? Easier than having me at a table near the head, telling the story of how Daniel once tried to make pancakes with a fork and burned a Cyrillic Dieu into the skillet. Easier than a photograph where my blouse didn't match their palette. Easier than the fact of me, the woman who remembered the year of every haircut and the cost of every pair of cleats, sitting in a church of twinkle lights made for strangers. I stood and walked the room because movement sometimes tricks grief into thinking it's not welcome. On the shelf were the textbooks I couldn't make myself give away. Biology with Daniel's notes in the margins, terrible doodles of mitochondria. A dog-eared paperback of To Kill a Mockingbird with my underline under his underline, 2 hands pointing to the same sentence across time. On the wall was the growth chart pencil marked into the paint. Age 9, shoe size 4. Age 13, a summer he lost weight, and I pretended not to notice. Age 17, the line a smudge because he couldn't stop laughing while I reached. These were not decorations. They were ledger entries, paid in full. On the coffee table sat my phone, blinking with a new message. From Daniel. Hope you understand. Don't take it personally. Emily's parents just want to keep it stress-free. The words arranged themselves like a salt circle against guilt. I imagined Emily peering over his shoulder, approving the tone, adjusting a comma. I typed and erased 3 replies. I settled on nothing and pressed send on silence. I opened Emily's public Instagram out of a masochism we now call curiosity. A story played. A photo of the invitation, cream card, gold script, a garland of watercolor grapes. Intimate celebration, the caption read, with a ring of petite hearts. Tap. A mood board, linen, glass, candlelight, a dress code that said elevated. Tap. Place cards in progress. Aunt Carol, Uncle Ray, the Havertys. Tap. A boomerang of her clinking flutes with her mother, 2 blonde heads leaning toward each other like matched bookends. I watched the loop of cheer 3 times and felt something in me fold into its smallest form. On the arm of the sofa, a loose thread tugged at my sleeve. It was from the blouse I'd bought for the occasion, the one still folded in its plastic on the bed. I picked at the thread and stopped myself. What would be the point of unraveling what I had already lost? I carried the blouse back to the bedroom and laid it flat. Under the lamplight, the fabric gleamed with a subservient shine, as if it had always intended to apologize for existing. I slid the hanger through the collar anyway, and hung it in the closet between a winter coat and a dress I wore to funerals. Back in the living room, I traced each frame with a dust cloth as if I could rewrite the caption under every picture. Theresa and Daniel, field trip. Theresa and Daniel, after stitches. Theresa and Daniel, learning to drive. I murmured the memories like prayers. Let me not forget, let me not be erased. I found the faint outline of my thumb on the glass of his kindergarten photo, the way you find fingerprints on a mirror when sun leans through it. Other people's voices came in through the walls, the Havertys admiring a shawl, the teenage boy across the street arguing kindly with his mother about curfew, a dog barking twice and then remembering itself. The world kept insisting on its ordinary. Inside my chest, something extraordinary and quiet happened. A rearrangement, a relabeling of shelves. I thought about Daniel's motives because mothers are forensic accountants of their children's hearts. He is conflict averse, always has been. He would rather pay interest forever than face the principal once. If Emily said the evening would be smoother without my energy, if her mother suggested the photos would read younger with a certain symmetry at the head table, if the budget tightened and there were only so many chairs, then Daniel did the math that cost him nothing now and everything later. He chose the path with fewer pebbles under his shoes. He assumed I would understand because I always had. And Emily, she worships at the altar of well-lit moments. She believes love is what you can pin to a grid and label us. She fears anything that exceeds the frame. If my stories run long, if my grief for Frank sometimes leaks into sentences uninvited, if my laugh is too loud for candlesticks, then I am a stain she cannot edit out. I can almost respect the clarity of it. Almost. Night climbed the windows. The wind chime on the porch trilled once, like a spume against glass. I sat with my hands folded and let the tears come and go until my face felt washed. Not because of a missed seat at a rented table, not because of a dress code I would have honored if asked, not even because of the word easier wearing my name like a scold. I cried for the arithmetic of it, how quickly love gets rounded off when convenience does the counting. I cried for the simple cruelty of a child who believes you will always be there, which is to say a child who has never had to imagine you leaving. When the house grew very still, I whispered my son's name to the empty room, not as a plea but as a recognition. Daniel. The boy with syrup on his chin and a cowlick that refused every comb. Daniel, the man who knows how to be polite to waiters and cruel to his mother without raising his voice. I wiped my face with the heel of my hand and sat up straight, the way my own mother used to tell me to do. The clock placed its next small dash on the page of the night. He had chosen convenience. He had chosen the lighter lift. He had chosen, just this once and possibly again, something other than love. Grief is heavy when it first sits down beside you. Then, if you refuse to feed it, it becomes something else, harder, angled, useful. Mine set like plaster. I wiped my face dry and went to the hall closet where I keep the banker's boxes labeled with a Sharpie. Taxes, insurance, house, Danielle. I set them on the dining table one by one and opened the lids as if they were doors I had closed on purpose. The room smelled faintly of paper and lemon oil. The clock on the wall pinned its steady seconds. I have always believed in order. Order had kept the lights on when Frank died, and the school forms kept coming. Order would do again. Frank and I carried one conversation so many times it smoothed into memory. If anything happens to me, Theresa, you sign here and here. Don't let anyone talk you into chasing what you don't understand. In the envelope with our marriage certificate was his neat penmanship, a stiffness to the letters he could never shake. I lifted the policy, remembered that winter, the adjuster's sad mouth, the check that looked obscene against our laminate counter. People think a life insurance payout is a windfall. It is a receipt. The coding on the line where they write the total might as well read, what it cost to live without him. I didn't squander it. I learned. In the diner after late shifts, I read the business section until my coffee went cold, circling the words that first felt like foreign currency and then like tools. Index fund, dividend, municipal, laddered CDs. I put money where it would not need to shout to be working. I set some aside for emergencies, the true kind, breaks, leaks, diagnosis. I bought nothing I couldn't maintain. When the market squawked, I turned off the television and stirred soup. Years thickened. The statements accumulated like quiet snowdrifts under the bed in the second bedroom where no one sleeps. I called my advisor, a woman named Nina Brooks, whose handshake is prompt and whose advice is never dressed in adjectives. "Nina, it's Theresa," I said when she picked up. "I need to revisit my estate plan." "Of course," she said, arranging her tone to the seriousness she heard. "Tell me what's changed." "Not the numbers," I said. "The names." We went through the folders piece by piece, not as a threat, not out of spite. I refused to build my future on a tantrum, but as an arithmetic of respect. The beneficiaries on the brokerage account. The small annuity I bought 10 years ago because the idea of steady checks soothed me. The old will, drafted when Daniel was 22 with elbows that banged on doorways, amended when he married so that Emily would be protected if tragedy knocked backwards. Each page recorded a belief I now saw clearly. That love would be reciprocated because I had poured mine faithfully. Nina read in silence, then asked the questions that matter. What impact do you want? Who do you trust to steward it? What story should this money tell about you? I wanted to say I believed in children who thought college was a locked door, I said. I wanted to say I remember how it feels to hand your last cash to a pharmacist. I wanted to say that the women who work the late shift are worth betting on. She suggested an endowed scholarship at the community college, a donor-advised fund for shelters, a small trust that would replace a car with something safe for a single mother when the mechanic's estimate made her cry. "We can put Daniel in a small position if you like," Nina said carefully. "One that isn't primary." "I don't like," I said, and the firmness surprised even me with its lack of heat. "If he learns to be a son again one day, let him do it without a contract." After we hung up, I dialed an attorney, Mark Temple, who wrote the original will and never forgot a widow's name. "Theresa," he said, his voice warm with that courtroom gravel, "you still keeping that place of yours immaculate?" "Immaculate is expensive," I said, and we both laughed, a gentle sound with no edges. I told him what I wanted: revisions, clarity, contingencies that didn't leave room for interpretation. No challenge clauses, he advised. Explicit language. We set a time to sign, and I hung up having moved my future an inch into the shape I recognized. The quiet in the house had changed timbre. It was no longer the quiet of being forgotten. It was the quiet of preparation. I replaced the banker's boxes, but not the one labeled DNIEL. That one I emptied onto the table and sorted into 2 stacks. What I kept for love, report cards with crooked stars, a crayon portrait where my hair is red as a fire truck, and what I kept for habit. Cards addressed to Mom with the ink fat and lazy, a Mother's Day mug from a kiosk where the glaze cracked along a fault line. The habit pile went back in the box. The love pile went into a drawer I open every morning when I hunt for receipts. If I was going to carry anything forward, let it be what made me soft, not what made me small. Then I turned to the one thing Emily understood better than any virtue, the grammar of display. She speaks in images. Captions follow. If I was going to be visible, the sentence had to be visual. You do not send a paragraph to a person who reads only headlines. You become the headline. I opened my laptop and typed 3 letters I had never typed with intention. BEN. The search results filled with long-nosed elegance and numbers that used to make me hold my breath. I clicked. A flying spur, understated in the way a diamond is understated because it refrains from singing. In photographs, the leather looked like the color of roasted almonds. The wood had a depth that refused plastic's quick shine. There were other choices. A Mercedes with a chauffeur's whisper. A Rolls that declared too loudly what I felt no need to yell. The Bentley spoke fluently in a language I understood. Heritage without apology, comfort with backbone. It did not beg to be believed. I made notes. Not just price, though I can do arithmetic in the dark, but proportions, lines, the way the car held its posture like someone raised to shake hands with their whole arm. I wrote down model years, depreciation curves, maintenance intervals. Money, to me, has always been a worker with a job description. If I was going to hire a symbol, I wanted it to show up on time and write reports I could file. The number, 200,000, occupied its box on the page without flinching. I could write that check without taking a breath. That is not bragging. It is a weather report after a long season of drought. Rain, finally, and measured. I closed the laptop and stood in my bedroom doorway, considering the closet as if it were a stage. My life has been built in cotton and sail rack wool, clothes that keep you warm and don't announce themselves. I wasn't about to turn myself into a mannequin at 67, but I understood palette. Emerald would respect my hair. Navy would respect my history. Whatever I chose, it would align with the message. Not gaudy, not borrowed, not eager. Possessed. On the dresser, Frank's old cufflinks caught a sliver of light. I touched them and felt the old ache without drowning in it. He had never cared about the colors in a tablescape. He believed in arrival as a form of love. Show up, stay, pay attention. If I was going to arrive now, it would be not for applause, but for translation. To translate absence into presence, invisibility into contour. A plan took its full weight then, not made of vengeance. Vengeance is sloppy, but of demonstration. I would not argue with Daniel or haggle with Emily's sense of scale. I would not stand on their porch and list my credentials. I would show them precisely what refusal costs. There are ideas you can only teach with a tangible noun. I washed the teacup I'd abandoned earlier and set it upside down to dry. I put the empty DNIEL box back in the closet and slid the others into their neat row. I wrote 2 lists on a yellow pad. Legal, logistics. Legal. Appointment with Mark, signatures, notarization, copies in the safe deposit box at First Federal. Logistics. Schedule a viewing at the dealership, confirm availability, arrange insurance, temporary tags, delivery timeline. Each line steadied me the way a railing steadies a staircase. Before bed I walked through the house, touching the objects that have held us steady. The table nicked by a butter knife, the lamp with the shade I reglue every spring, the wind chime Frank pretended to hate. I did not rehearse speeches. I am past speeches. I rehearsed posture. Head high, shoulders back, hands still. My mother used to tap my spine and say, "This is the rod God gave you. Use it." In the mirror, my face was the face of a woman who has done hard things quietly and can now do one hard thing out loud. I turned off the light. The plan did not glow in the dark. It didn't need to. It had taken on form and gravity, the kind that pulls other decisions into its orbit. I got into bed, not calm exactly, but decided, and in that decision was a kind of sleep I had not known in years. Twilight made a slow river of the boulevard leading to Larkspur Hall, turning every windshield into a thin piece of copper. The venue sat back from the street behind stone pillars and a metal arch dressed in eucalyptus and string lights, Emily's curated vineyard fantasy transplanted to the city. Cars idled in a half-moon before the valet stand, glossy SUVs, a rented limousine, a cluster of identical sedans that looked like they'd all agreed in advance not to be noticed. Music, strings lifted by a speaker, a cello pretending it live, poured politely from the courtyard and blended with the small talk of guests who had arrived early to be seen arriving early. Then the Bentley rounded the corner and the night adjusted itself. I had chosen the flying spur for what it did not do as much as for what it did. It did not peacock. It did not shout. It held the road with the composure of a cathedral being pushed gently on wheels. The almond leather held my shoulders the way a reassuring hand does in church. The veneer, dark, patient wood, caught a sliver of dusk and returned it without showing off. The V8 murmured, a civilized animal. My hands were steady on the wheel. I had driven this route once to pick up Daniel from a college banquet, sitting in traffic behind delivery vans, laughing to myself when I realized I'd brought him a sack of oranges like he was still 12. Now I watched the same trees throw longer shadows and thought only of angles, the arc of the turn, the geometry of arrival. The valets saw me first, and their choreography stuttered. One boy, Jacob, his name tag said, a high school jawline and prom hair, moved his hand to wave me forward, then reconsidered and smoothed his tie. The other, older, with the posture of someone who had been told 1,000 times to stand up straight, stepped toward the cur and lifted his chin. The line of cars paused as if a conductor had tapped his bacon. I eased the Bentley into the pocket of light before the steps, let the engine idle a beat longer than necessary, then turned the key. Silence gathered with intent. In the windshield I saw guests turn their heads, not in the furtive way people glance at a curiosity, but with the frank, hungry attention reserved for what will be discussed on the ride home. The headlights washed the front of the hall, wreaths, bow-handled doors, a welcome easel lettered in gold that read 5 years of us, and bleached Emily's garland to bone. The door opened with the weightless hinge of good engineering. I set one heel, then the other, on the stone apron and rose. The dark emerald gown I'd chosen did the work I'd asked of it. It respected my silver hair and my years. It did not compete for the sentence. It underlined it. I had the seamstress angle the hem so it cleared the ground by the width of a heartbeat. When I moved, it moved. When I stood, it rested. My mother used to say, "If a dress is right, you forget you're wearing it until someone remembers for you." The murmurs remembered for me now. That's Daniel's mother. The question dominoed through the crowd, changing pitch on every tongue. Aunt Carol lowered her pearls a fraction, as if the necklace might be listening. Uncle Ray set his glass down on the registration table without looking and left a shallow ring where condensation acknowledged his nerves. The Havertys, professional eavesdroppers, synchronized their surprise and then set about recalibrating it into approval. Cousin Linda, God bless her lack of stealth, let her eyebrows climb and then gave a small, satisfied nod that read, "About time somebody brought the punctuation." Emily stood 15 feet away, mid-laugh with a circle of ladies who wore their clutch purses like shields. She saw the car first, then the color of my dress, then me inside it like the final answer on a test she'd hoped would be multiple choice. The smirk she keeps for lowercase remarks. We're doing plant forward. It's adults only, just keeping things consistent, loosened. Her cheeks tightened as if she were bracing herself against a wind that hadn't yet arrived. The curve at one corner of her mouth, the one she tilts toward cameras, flattened into function. Smile as instruction, not emotion. Behind her, Daniel took an involuntary half-step forward. My son wears his nerves in his shoulders. They rose now, a tide under his suit. The hand that once reached for my sleeve on crowded streets slid toward the inside of his jacket, not to touch his heart, that would have been too much, but to check the stiffness of his pocket square, because men are taught to adjust something when they cannot adjust themselves. "Good evening, ma'am," Jacob said, recovering his training and reaching for the door with the tender reverence boys reserve for what they don't understand and want to. His fingers touched the paint and bounced, as if the car had told him I have been paid for. Treat me accordingly. "Thank you," I said. My voice surprised me in its ease. To be calm is, sometimes, to be armored. He held out a small plastic ticket toward me, a number on one side, a brand name on the other, but I kept my hand at my side. "I won't need that," I said kindly. "No one's driving this but me." The older valet understood immediately. His nod said, "Understood. You will not be misplaced tonight." Music faltered and then resumed, the invisible DJ lifting, choosing, laying the bow back on the string. The easel with 5 years of us wobbled in a breeze and settled at an angle that annoyed me in a practical way. I resisted the impulse to straighten it. A photographer drifted close, reflex guiding his lens toward light, toward money, toward whatever event might justify his invoice later. He raised his camera slightly, then lowered it, reading what I hoped the entire assembly would. This was not spectacle. This was statement. I stood still long enough for the scene to happen. You can rush past a moment and make it small, or you can let it measure itself against you. Dim conversation restarted at the perimeter, a tentative return to the safe topics: parking, appetizers, the merit of twinkle lights as a solution to everything. But in the inner orbit, where attention has a different gravity, mouths thinned, eyes recalculated. Someone, I believe it was Doris Haverty, whispered Bentley to no one in particular, not the way one says a brand, but as if invoking a saint whose miracles are widely rumored. The courtyard had arranged itself for photographs. Lanterns in a staggered row, a vines and velvet photo booth with a prop barrel and a chalkboard that said "Best Day Ever." I looked at the barrel and remembered Frank insisting good whiskey didn't need a day. It needed a glass and a friend. Somewhere near the string of lights, Emily's mother paused mid-gesture, her hands hovering around another woman's lapel the way stylists do when they want their touch to be mistaken for care. She saw me and went briefly blank. Then she pasted her expression back on, glittering, and began moving toward me with a stride that suggested possession of the space. The air cooled as the sun dipped under the roofline. The gown held its color. The car held its own silence. I let one hand rest on the top of the door long enough for its warmth to transfer. My nails, trimmed short, caught the gleam and gave it back. I could feel a phone in my clutch vibrating with a delayed chorus, messages from people who had seen Instagram flicker with the arrival. A taillight, a guess, an exclamation mark straining at the leash of decorum. I did not reach for it. The only notifications I required were present tense and face-to-face. Daniel closed the distance. Up close, I saw the tiny crease between his eyebrows that shows up when he wants to be liked by two people with opposite needs. "Mom," he said, the word both affectionate and alert, like a lifeguard calling a child away from the deep end. His cologne smelled expensive and a little nervous. He made a small motion with his hands, something between welcome and apology. "Theresa," Emily said, using my name as a way to move me into a category built for names instead of relationships. Her tone was varnished, and I could hear the brush strokes. The women behind her took in the fabric of my dress, the understated line of my shoes, the shameless way the car tucked itself like punctuation at the end of the sentence. They whispered their arithmetic and arrived at their answers. "Mrs. Whittaker," said Emily's mother, landing on formality as if it were a staircase she had practiced. She extended a hand, palm cool, fingers rehearsed. "What a lovely surprise." "It's not a surprise," I said pleasantly. "It's an arrival." A server slipped between bodies with a tray of champagne that winked under the lights. He offered me a flute. I took it, not to drink, but to give my fingers a prop and the moment a sparkle that cameras understand. The stem felt like the neck of a small bird. I did not raise it. I let it exist. Around us, the whispers continued their migration, gathering context, trying on new intentions. Awe here, envy there, a dash of disapproval to cover fear. Emily's smirk did not return. In its place, a calculation clicked through options and found none that matched the palette. Daniel swallowed. The wind moved the eucalyptus over the arch and released a scent somewhere between clean and medicinal. I lifted my eyes to the hall doors, open, bright, framed by candles. Laughter spilled out from inside and thinned in the open air. Every detail had been arranged, edited, filtered in advance. Yet here was a variable no mood board could domesticate. A mother arriving under her own power, in her own sentence, in a machine whose price tag doubled as a translated message. I had said nothing yet. I didn't need to. The text was printed in the room already. I gave the valet a small nod of thanks, placed one foot on the first step, and felt the stone accept my weight. The gown whispered against my ankles. The murmurs rose, then held. I moved forward, not quickly, not slow, just at the speed of a decision you've already made, and the night parted like a curtain to let me through. The foyer swallowed the courtyard noise the moment the doors closed behind me. Inside, Larkspur Hall smelled like money made to behave. Beeswax on old wood, florist's breath in the air, champagne turning from cold to clever on silver trays. A harpist, recorded, not present, braided familiar melodies into wallpaper. The lighting was engineered to flatter stemware and deny shadows. Someone had polished the banister to an opinion. Daniel reached me first, cutting through a drift of cousins and neighbors, his mouth rehearsing a smile that could not survive the distance. "Mom, you didn't have to." I stopped him with my palm raised to the height where, years ago, I used to catch his chin to dab at jelly. The gesture found its old accuracy. He halted. The champagne at the nearest table bubbled like a nervous laugh and went flat. My voice when it came felt like the cool side of a coin. "Daniel," I said, steady enough that the small conversations around us hesitated. "I came here not because I was invited, but because I needed to make something clear. The fortune your father and I built, the wealth I saved for the family, it will no longer belong to you. You've shown me where I stand." The sentence crossed the room in a straight line. Utensils paused over plates. A server reassessed his route mid-step, pivoting as if the floor plan had changed. The photographer lowered his camera an inch, then another, as if the lens needed to listen. The gold script on the seating chart, 5 years of this, looked suddenly like a misprint. Emily's face did a precise thing. Not a collapse, not a flinch. It drained. The brightness that she wears for devices deserted her in favor of something more honest, calculation cracking under pressure. Her cheeks tightened. The tiny muscles at the corners of her eyes flickered with a message I could finally read without a filter. This does not fit the grid. She moved closer, arranging herself so her body almost but did not quite touch Daniel's, 2 points plotting a public front. Her hand floated, reconsidered the shoulder it meant to claim, retreated to the safety of her clutch. Daniel's silence had a temperature. You could have set a glass on it and watched condensation form. He blinked as if the air had become a slideshow. Once, when he was 12, he broke a neighbor's garden light and stood holding the pieces, speaking in half-starts, hoping an adult would raise a wand and say undone. That memory flickered across his face now, boy and man overlaying, the transparency aligned at the eyes. "Theresa," Emily said, choosing my name like a gate code. "We don't need to do this here." "Why don't we?" "You didn't need to do it out there," I said, without changing my tone. "But you did." I let the words settle between us, a place setting no one had anticipated. Aunt Carol's pearls clicked softly as she turned her head. Uncle Ray exhaled into his napkin as if he'd been holding air for sport. The Havertys leaned toward each other, predatory, then had the grace to lean back. Somewhere by the bar, someone attempted a laugh, realized it had nowhere to live, and put it away. I opened my clutch, and with the same economy I used to extract a single tissue from a tight box, drew out a slim, sealed envelope. No flourish, just paper and intention. I placed it in Daniel's hand, and the envelope made a dry sound, the kind paper makes when it knows it contains a change in weather. "What is?" he began. "Clarity," I said. "You once asked me for the difference between promise and contract. Tonight, I prefer both." He stared at the envelope as if it might confess before he opened it. He did not tear it. Daniel never tears anything he thinks might need to be returned. He slid a finger under the flap, careful, as if the document inside could bruise. He read the top line and then did not read further. He understood from the first sentence what the rest of the sentences were trained to do. His throat moved. The tendons in his hand tightened. The paper swayed and quieted. Emily, craning, caught only the words amended and irrevocable. The syllables landed on her ear like hail. Her lips formed a small oval, then straightened, then parted again. She had no slot for irrevocable in her organizer. Nothing in her calendar glowed that color. "Mom," Daniel said at last, voice edged with a plea he did not know where to aim. "We could have talked. We could have. This feels..." "Late," I supplied. "It feels exactly as late as it is." A woman I did not know, tasteful in top, performed concern near Emily's elbow. "Maybe a private room?" She suggested to no one in particular, to everyone, the way one recommends coffee after a funeral. Another voice tried, "Let's be reasonable," as if reason were a candle you could relight with 2 fingers. The harp music continued to behave itself. Emily's mother advanced on a glide path of practiced hospitality. She offered me a smile that had comforted donors and frightened caterers. "Mrs. Whittaker, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Emotions run high before an event. Let's..." "There is no misunderstanding," I said, turning the full face of my years toward her, and then back to the only face that mattered. "Daniel, you made a choice. I'm making one." He looked at me with something raw and childlike peeling through the adult. It was not grief. Grief requires recognition of value. It was recognizably its cousin, loss realized at the moment of inventory. I thought. He started, then stopped, because finishing a sentence obligates you to own it. "We wanted the night to be easy." I heard that, I said. I heard it on the phone, and in the silence, and in the way my mailbox stayed light. Ease is rarely free, Daniel. Someone pays. He swallowed. The chandelier above us mapped light onto his cheekbones. Shadows did careful trigonometry across the room. He folded the envelope, a timid attempt to make it smaller, then refolded it the other way when he realized the crease defied symmetry. The gesture betrayed him. He has always tried to tidy what cannot be tidied. "Theresa," Emily said again, angling her body to shield him, as if my words were weather she could block with posture. "Of course we love you. This was a logistics thing. Capacity, flow, parents hosting. You sent invitations to neighbors and left your husband's mother to interrogate the mailman," I said. "You curated a guest list and decided that the woman who kept this man alive on casseroles and overtime would not photograph well. That is not logistics. That is taste. And now you can live with yours." Her mouth opened and shut. For a moment I saw her uncaptioned, no pastel overlay, no script font, simply a young woman trying to steer a narrative and finding the steering column detached. Ambition flashed through her eyes like light on a knife, and then, just as quickly, fear. Fear of what exclusion looks like when it goes 3D. Cousin Linda, who has never met a silence she respects, breathed, "Good for you," not altogether under her breath. A ripple ran through the back rows, the kind of ripple that begins as scandal and ends as precedent. Daniel tried for a different door. "This is about money?" he asked, as if naming the content might shrink it. "No, I don't. Mom, I've never asked." "No," I said. "This is about value." I spoke the language you chose. A server reached us with a tray. His hand trembled. One flute tipped and kissed its neighbor with the clean sound of glass admitting surprise. I took a glass and set it on the nearest table without drinking, giving the moment a place to stay that was not my throat. The band of guests at the periphery widened its circumference, the way crowds do around a street performer, anticipating a climax they can recount later. I refused to give them spectacle. I gave them syntax. "You will find," I said, "that the documents are not conditional. They are not warnings. They are conclusions." Daniel's eyes climbed from the page to mine. For an instant I saw the boy he had been, damp hair at the pool, knees shining with chlorine, asking if I had watched his dive. I had always been watching. Now I watched him blink against an idea that love can be constant and still choose a different address. Emily's voice softened into something close to true. "Theresa," she said, and the syllables lost their lacquer. "We made a mistake." "Yes," I replied, allowing the justice of that word to stand on its own feet. I did not offer it a chair. I did not dress it for comfort. The room accepted the noun without decor. Behind us, the welcome easel canted again. A draft breathed through the corridor and lifted a corner of the escort cards, names seeking something firmer than cardstock to cling to. The ceiling's crown molding threw thin shadows like ruled lines in a ledger. The harp melody modulated and returned to its theme, as if reminding the hall that repetition is how songs teach memory. Daniel held the envelope, the weight of what was his and is no longer, and for a moment neither of us spoke. In the pause I heard the sum of all the bills I'd paid, the lunches I packed, the double shifts I took, and the single nights I spent scanning the ceiling for cracks in our luck. I heard Frank coughing in winter. I heard my own mother's voice telling me to keep my back straight, because someday I would need it to carry a different kind of load. I lowered my hand. "That is all," I said, not unkind. I had brought no anger to waste on ceremony. I had brought only an end. The room, having expected a storm, received a verdict. It knew what to do with that. It went very, very still. The door gave back the sound of itself, heavy, final, when I pushed into the night. The courtyard murmurs flattened against the glass, then even they were behind me. Air met my skin cool and clean, as if the evening had been holding a breath, and chose that second to release it. I crossed the stone, each step a period. The valets straightened, hats tilted to the precise angle that says they have witnessed something they will not repeat. The Bentley waited with the patience of good machinery. The handle was warm under my fingers. The cabin accepted me, leather giving the smallest sigh, a space built for composure. I turned the key. The engine answered low and even, the way a river sounds when it knows the route by heart. Headlights spilled across the facade, swept the arch of eucalyptus, and then found the road. Behind me, Larkspur Hall shrank from a certainty to a postcard to a rumor. I did not peel away. I did not need drama to validate decision. I let the car ease down the half-moon drive, yield to a couple stepping uncertainly from a rideshare, drift past the guard who lifted the gate and tried to read my face for a clue. Once on the boulevard, traffic received me without comment. Red lights came and held me as they have always held everyone. Green lights released me. Unremarkable gifts I accepted with gratitude and without metaphor. Street by street, the city arranged itself again into rectangles and signals and strangers with their own stories. Tears came, not in a flood, but along the careful fault lines grief lays in advance. They blurred the gold halos of street lamps, turned taillights into softened rubies. I let them run. There was nothing shameful in salt. The wiper clicked once, polite as a house guest, and cleared a path I could see through. Hurt and relief braided in the same length of breath. It stung to say goodbye to a future I had set aside like good china. It steadied me to know I had finally stopped setting a table for people who chose not to sit. At a long red on Ashland, I looked sideways at my reflection. Silver hair neat, emerald dress a dark tide across the seat, a woman whose eyes had learned the difference between sorrow and regret. The driver in the next lane glanced over, registered the car, then me, then the car again, and looked away with a small headshake that meant nothing and everything. The world continues, even here, even now. I thought of Frank, not as a ghost, but as a voice with weight. Show up, stay, pay attention. I had done all three. The farther I drove, the more a sentence clarified, not in my mouth, but in my chest. I am finished apologizing for existing where I have earned the right to stand. Money, which had always behaved for me as a quiet employee, showing up on time, taking out the trash of worry, suddenly felt like a language. Tonight I had spoken it fluently and without raising my voice. Not to wound, to define. At the crest by the park, the city opened like a map. Windows flickered. Trains stitched neighborhoods together with mercury thread. The Bentley hummed. My hands were steady. In the rear view, Larkspur Hall no longer existed. In the windshield, my block was still 10 minutes away and exactly where I left it. The present, I decided, is sometimes nothing more complicated than a road that remains under you when your life above it changes shape. I let my mind inventory what this ending freed. The scholarship that would bear no one's last name but would carry many beginnings. The shelter where a hot shower at midnight can change the odds. The small, practical grace of a safe car for a woman whose mechanic speaks to her like a wall. I saw not institutions but verbs. Replace, repair, relieve, remind. Money as action, not crown. Generosity as a daily chore done well. And I thought, briefly, of Daniel, not as a caution, not as a grievance pinned to cork, but as a boy who grew into a man trained by 100 soft choices to believe that love is a resource without invoices. I had finally sent one. He could pay an understanding later. Or not. Either way, the account in me had closed its ledger and laid down the pen. Home arrived the way it always does. The elm bending over the curb. The porch light I left on out of habit and hospitality. The wind chime Frank pretended to hate catching the smallest seam of air. I pulled into the drive and cut the engine. Silence did not rush in. It settled, familiar, like a blanket folded over knees. For a minute I stayed seated, hands still on the wheel, letting the absence of the motor calibrate my hearing. An owl called once from somewhere I could not see. A neighbor's television murmured the harmless drama of a rerun. My own breath arranged itself into even lines again. Inside, the house received me with its old catalog of sounds, the refrigerator's thoughtful hum, the tick that lives in the hallway clock, the floorboard near the back door that speaks when you pass as if to ask, "Where have you been?" I hung the emerald gown on the closet's outer knob for now. To force it back into darkness felt ungrateful. I set my shoes beneath the chair, pointed toes aligned like punctuation, and placed my clutch on the dresser. The mirror offered me without commentary. I touched the hollow behind my ear, where one earring had pressed, a small ache proof that presence also leaves marks. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle and set it on. The blue flame licked evenly around the base. While I waited, I wiped the counter with a cloth I rinsed and wrung and folded into a square smaller than my palm. My grandmother taught me to end a day with order. The sink empty, the lights low, the corners acknowledged. The kettle's whistle rose, and I turned it off before it reached crescendo. Not every notice needs to be loud. I poured the water over a tea bag and watched the color spread, amber claiming clear, slow, and confident. Steam lifted. I breathed it in and found it smelled like nothing at all, just warmth, which is to say, permission. On the table lay a single frame I had not put back after dusting last week. Daniel at 5 in orange floaties, eyes narrowed against sun, cheeks slick with popsicle. I sat across from that boy and did not ask him to explain the man. Love does not need a witness to justify itself. It simply chooses again and again the direction it will face. Tonight mine faced outward. I carried the tea to the living room and placed it on a coaster Frank made in a shop class taught by a man who smelled like sawdust and fairness. I did not turn on the television. I did not open my phone. I sat and listened to the house remember how to be itself. In that plainness, power arrived, not as a crown set on the head, not as applause, but as a quiet aligning of spine and will. I have weathered harder nights with less clarity. I have held fevers and funerals without losing the thread. Now, even with my eyes still rimmed in salt, I could locate the thread between forefinger and thumb and feel it hold. When the tea cooled to the exact temperature my mouth likes, I drank it. The wind chime sounded once, then rested. A car passed outside and did not slow. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked and then reconsidered. I stood, turned off the porch light, and lowered the shades, not to hide, simply because it was time. In the bedroom, I slid the gown from the knob and laid it carefully across the cedar chest. Tomorrow it would go to its hanger with tissue at the shoulders, a jewel returned to its quiet. Tonight it could drape and breathe. I touched the fabric with the flat of my hand, cool, smooth, evidence that dignity can be worn and then folded without losing shape. Freedom, I thought, is sometimes just objects obeying you again. I turned back the bed and smoothed the sheet with the palm that once cooled Daniel's forehead. A memory came. A younger me standing in a dark room at 2 a.m, counting the seconds between his coughs, and I let it pass through without taking anything on its way. I switched off the lamp. The room stilled to that particular quiet that sits only after the last decision of a day. In it, I could finally hear the softest truth. I had not punished, I had preserved. I had not destroyed, I had redrawn. Did it hurt? Of course. Love leaves bruises where it held on. But beneath the ache lay a relief wide enough to walk into. The fortune would go where it could behave like grace. The future would belong to people I had not met but recognized by need. And mine, my small, exact life, would go on without contorting itself around anyone's comfort. I closed my eyes. The darkness didn't feel like absence. It felt like room. And in that room, unadorned by strings or script, I felt the clean, astonished weight of freedom, the kind that doesn't need to be seen to be true, and is, in the end, the sweetest revenge.